Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 2020 and to your review of the 2020 British Grand Prix. Round 4 of the season threw up so many dramas, so many spicy moments, and that final lap, those final 2 or 3 laps, oh my goodness, what a thrill that was. If you don't want to find out the result and if you're trying to avoid spoilers, I would recommend clicking off this video, going and watching the race and coming back afterwards. But as always, if you are new around here, feel free to subscribe. I hope you enjoy the video as always. Before we get into the result, this was your grid for the 2020 British Grand Prix. And it was no surprise yesterday that it was a Mercedes 1-2 in qualifying, locking out that front row of the grid once again in 2020. Lewis Hamilton taking another British Grand Prix pole position. Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc were on row 2. Lando Norris for his home Grand Prix would line up 5th. He had his teammate Carlos Sainz directly behind him, but Lance Stroll split the 2 Mclarens. Ricciardo and Ocon 8th and 9th, a much better turn of pace for Renault this weekend. Sebastian Vettel all the way at the end of the top 10. Your bottom half of the grid started with Pierre Gasly on fresh tyres. Albon struggled in qualifying in P12. Hulkenberg on his return lined in front of his arch nemesis Kevin Magnussen. Giovinazzi and Raikkonen won row 8. Grosjean and Latifi row 9, and Kvyat and Russell, after both picking up 5 place penalties, Kvyat for an engine change, Russell for ignoring yellow flags in qualifying, would round off the grid. Spoiler warning ahead for your British Grand Prix. Here we go. Lewis Hamilton, victorious in Silverstone, and though on paper it seems pretty inevitable that Lewis was going to win, it wasn't that straightforward, and a last lap drama really did just put everyone on edge, thinking that Red Bull may just be able to sneak their first win of the season. More on that in a moment. But it was Max Verstappen in P2, a fastest lap point at the end as well. Seems okay, but when you know that win was on the line, they'll be a little bit disappointed. And it's Charles Leclerc for Ferrari. What a surprise that is. Didn't expect to see a Ferrari on the podium this weekend, but just like last season, Leclerc top 3. Ricciardo, a awesome race from the Aussie driver P4 in that kind of best of the rest. It's very strange that best of the rest title, how it worked this season, but P4 for Danny Rick, comfortably his and Renault's best result of the season. Norris, P5, finished where he started, but maybe a little bit more on the table today. Ocon, P6, his best result since returning to Formula 1. Gasly, another great race from him in P7. Alex Albon recovered to 8th place, a very eventful day for the Tyre driver. Stroll and Vettel rounded off the points. Valtteri Bottas, P11 for Mercedes. Another driver in the wars with a few laps to go. George Russell P12. What a great drive for him, almost in the points with all that carnage going off in the final few laps. Carlos Sainz was running in the points, high points positions for the majority of the race until he also got caught up in those last lap dramas. Giovinazzi, quite a strong drive actually. Alpha doesn't have a lot of pace, but P12 down to P14, not too bad. Latifi P15. Romain Grosjean had an eventful day, probably the most we've seen of him all season long. Definitely going to have to talk about him a little bit later on. Kimi Raikkonen, a lap down, really struggled today. Did old Kimi, another driver involved in incidents with about 10 laps to go. Kvyat, Magnussen and Hulkenberg all failed to finish, with Hulkenberg failing to start due to an engine issue and the team failing to get the car started before we even got to the grid. Lots to get through then in today's race. Of course, those last lap dramas with the Pirelli tyres exploding, just like we saw back in 2012. We saw it with the 2 Ferraris, didn't we, in 2017. A very similar incident today, but this time with the 2 Mercedes, Carlos Sainz and Kimi Raikkonen also having similar issues. And we'll talk about those when we get to each team. If you are new around here, what we like to do in this discussion-y section, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section below, of course, but we usually start from the top or start from the bottom and work our way through the order, just dissecting how everybody's race went. And I think today we'll start at the top. We'll start with those big stories, with the Mercedes, with Max Verstappen, because all 3 of them were pretty much in a class of their own, and for the majority of the Grand Prix, if not the entirety of the Grand Prix minus the last 5 laps, ran in the exact order: Hamilton, Bottas, Verstappen. Bottas challenged Hamilton into turn 1, but was relatively unscathed. Then we had a couple of safety cars. Hamilton did some brilliant restarts. Bottas caught napping the first time around, but Verstappen in that Red Bull didn't have enough power to really challenge the two Mercedes. But Verstappen backed off a little bit, nurtured his tyres while the two Mercedes were trading fastest laps in that middle stint of the race. And ultimately, when push came to shove with 2 laps to go, Bottas's tyre exploded, Hamilton's tyre exploded, and Verstappen, from out of nothing, had a chance of winning. Now, Bottas's tyre exploded with about 3 or 4 laps to go. He was able to come in and do a pit stop. Hamilton's tyre seemed on the edge, but Red Bull decided to play it conservative and said, look, we'll bring Max in, we'll go for the fastest lap. Now, Bottas has got to pit. Bottas dropped way out of the points after running a solid P2 for the majority of the race. Verstappen pitted, seemed to have a comfortable second place in front of Charles Leclerc, got the fastest lap. Happy days. But what Red Bull didn't account for, and a lot of people didn't account for, was Lewis Hamilton's tyre exploding. Now, Crofty, bless him, and to be fair to Crofty, the TV graphic came up on screen. Lewis Hamilton, his tyre had exploded. You couldn't quite see the helmet, and I think everyone went bananas. However, a couple of seconds later, the graphic was corrected. Don't worry, it was Bottas's on board. Everyone went, oh, sigh of relief for Hamilton fans around the world. But don't you worry, you're not going to get away that lightly. Only a couple of laps later, on the final lap, we then go over to Hamilton, and his tyre did indeed explode, and we had one of the most intense final laps we've seen for such a long time. We've seen some crazy ones this year. We've seen Norris hunting down Hamilton for that podium in the opening race. We saw Norris again in that queue of cars chasing down Perez, who had damage. But I think this one, for the lead of the race, for the chance that Mercedes might not win in 2020, for Hamilton, who had led every single lap, to lose it on the final few corners, Verstappen bombing it, who eventually got fastest lap on that final lap. Goodness me, that is one of the most tense moments I've seen in F1 for a long, long time. And Hamilton, just by the skin of his teeth, was able to hold on to the victory over Verstappen. Tyre flailing all over the place with a lap to go. Really was the embodiment of Bono, my tyres have gone. But was he a lucky boy today, Lewis Hamilton? Arguably, yes. Arguably, with that pit stop from Red Bull and Verstappen, that cost Red Bull the victory today. I've seen a lot of people complaining that Red Bull did that. But to be fair to them, they did get fastest lap, though Albon did already have it for Red Bull. But for Verstappen, that's an extra point. As well as the fact, if Hamilton hadn't have exploded his tyre, which could have technically held on for another lap, they would have looked silly not coming in and getting a fastest lap point. So at the time, it was the right thing to do. Yes, they'll be kicking themselves, but a P2 and a fastest lap, Verstappen also very close to Bottas in the standings now, isn't too bad at all. But all three of those at the front in a race of their own. Hamilton giving us a bit of a show and a bit of last lap dramas at the end of the race. But can you imagine if Hamilton's tyre had exploded one lap earlier? Not only would that have given Verstappen a guaranteed victory, it would have put Charles Leclerc second and Daniel Ricciardo on the podium. There was this midfield fight as always, but Leclerc, kind of like those top three, in a realm of his own really. Leclerc was in P4, fighting with Verstappen actually on that opening lap, really giving him a good run for it. On a couple of the restarts as well after the safety car, Leclerc was trying to hunt that Red Bull, but the Ferrari pace just isn't of those top two cars. And Leclerc did a fantastic job gunning it when he needed to early doors, getting away from that incredible midfield fight we saw today with the two Renaults, the two Mclarens. We saw Vettel involved, Lance Stroll, Romain Grosjean as well. Really enjoyed that fight today. But Leclerc did awesome of just getting out of trouble, whereas his teammate Vettel was stuck in the middle of that fight, even out of the points, for the majority of that Grand Prix. So Leclerc's drive already warranted what is going to be close to driver of the day. Quite a few picks, actually. We'll talk about that later on. But Leclerc getting a podium, I think's just reward for a fantastic drive today. Did he deserve it on pace? No. But did he deserve it on merit? I think that's more than fair to say. But a driver who had to get his elbows out a little bit more today, Daniel Ricciardo. He said before the race, didn't he, that P6 would be a dream result for the team. So coming away with a fourth and a P6, I think Renault will be extremely happy tonight. But as I just mentioned, Hamilton's tyre had gone one lap earlier, it could have been that podium for Renault, but I think they'll take it. A fourth place equals their best result from last season. They were able to get that in Monza, but today they really had to work hard for it. They had a great fight once again with the McLarens on the opening lap. Ricciardo, Norris and Sainz really going for some awesome moves, and whereas Norris held on to Ricciardo on the inside of Copse last year, this year Ricciardo was just able to get him on that opening lap just before they got to Copse, but throughout the race they were chopping and changing positions, and going into that final 10-lap sprint, Norris came on the radio, he was behind Sainz and Ricciardo was hunting him down and said, look guys, Carlos is going to have to hurry up, Ricciardo's coming, and that's exactly what Daniel did. Unfortunately, they didn't show it on TV, the move, so we're not quite sure how good it was, but Danny Rick had to make so many overtakes. Even if it was DRS assisted, did a great job of being in the right place at the right time. Both Renault cars really looked after their tyres well, actually. That car looking really strong in race trim, and I'm looking forward to seeing them next weekend when there's going to be a potentially 2 or maybe 3-stop Grand Prix coming into play. And Ricciardo, a P4, a dream result for the team. Ocon as well, doing a very similar job to Danny Rick. Just a little bit off the pace, but like Danny Rick, made some awesome overtakes, some awesome moves, had a great fight with his best friend Lance Stroll in F1. Stroll a little bit naughty at one stage, getting the black and white flag like Grosjean did. We'll talk about that when we get to Romain Grosjean. But Ocon, another really strong result. I think his best since his return, not only points-wise, of course, but actually performance-wise, very close to the level of Ricciardo this weekend. And I'm very impressed just all round with Renault here. 4th and 6th, yes, it's helped out by Sainz and Bottas getting their punches late on. But to be fair to them, Ricciardo did drive a great race anyway. And Ocon, credit where credit's due. But Norris was able to split the two Renaults. And for McLaren, a 5th and 6th almost seemed nailed on. But that puncher for Sainz late on, he drove a brilliant race actually. He was going to be one of my, and still kind of is in the mix, for driver of the day contentions. Got the moves done really early on the first lap. Some fantastic moves on Ricciardo, a great move on his teammate as well, and was able to just maintain that pace for quite a long time. Got past Grosjean much quicker than the rest of the midfield was able to do. But so unlucky with that puncher. And whereas last year it was Norris that was getting some torrid luck, this year it seems to be Carlos Sainz that is getting the brunt of McLaren's bad luck. But I think once again proving that he is a really strong driver. And Ferrari, with Vettel struggling today, having Sainz in that car next year isn't such a bad thing. Norris though, a quiet race, I think is fair to say. Last year he did a brilliant race here last year at Silverstone, but strategy really hurt him. An awful strategy call to do a 2-stop. This year was kind of lucky that his tyre didn't explode, considering his teammates did and the 2 Mercedes did. But he held on, brought it home, P5, another huge heap of points, keeping him well and truly in a fantastic position in the standings as well. Behind this battle, a driver who's ended up with a brilliant result and once again had a brilliant Grand Prix, Pierre Gasly. Had a great start, was able to get up into that top 10, but then we had the safety car. All the cars came in and poor Gasly lost about 3 or 4 positions during that safety car period, but slowly worked his way back up through the field, made a great overtake on Sebastian Vettel, an awesome overtake on Lance Stroll, and P7 again in 2020 in a car which, I've said a few times, I think shouldn't really be in the points. It's on the edge. It's a kind of car that, is it quicker than the Ferraris? Obviously, Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, Renault, not really. But if you put a driver who is on a bit of form, on a bit of a run like Gasly is at the moment, throw in and sprinkle in a few questionable moments with some driving antics, throw in a few punches like we did today, Gasly kept out of trouble, once again beating Alex Albon in a really strong drive from the young Frenchman. Alex Albon did finish behind him in P8 and certainly had another eventful day. It wasn't the charge through the field that I think a lot of people were expecting. However, I don't think a lot of people were expecting Albon and Magnussen to crash on lap 1, causing a safety car, which kind of put pay to any real chance of big points for Alex Albon. The incident itself, I'm very much on the fence with. Magnussen, going through the final couple of corners, clouted the inside curb, a little bit of a wobble, got an awful exit off the corner. Albon had a great exit, and had a little look into the final corner. But the nature of the final corner at Silverstone isn't really a passing opportunity. Alex was able to get about half a car length alongside K-Mag, but K-Mag was never expecting someone to overtake there, turned in, took the race in line, contact between the two of them, Kevin sent flying off into the outside of the final corner, into the barriers, losing a tyre as well. That was slightly worrying. The tyre tethers not doing their job there on that Haas. Albon got away unscathed, but did receive a 5-second penalty. I kind of think this is a racing incident, which kind of goes against the grain of what I think a lot of people are saying over on the Twitter. Not the most reliable source of F1, of course. But I think Alex, obviously, there's no malice there. He did get half his car lengths over. Kevin really did leave no space whatsoever. Penalty, I thought, was a little harsh. Though when you do consider it completely ruined Kevin Magnussen's race, took him out of the Grand Prix after a brilliant start from the Danish driver, I can see where they're coming from. So I'm kind of on the fence. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And it's one of those ones I think I need to see a few more times before I really put my thoughts in stone. But after getting the penalty, doing a 2-stop race, was lucky with those punches late on, was lucky with drivers really struggling with their tyre management. Albon doing a 2-stop, of course. His tyres were in great nick going into the final few laps, so got some awesome overtakes done. 4 points isn't dreadful, and damage limitation certainly isn't the worst weekend, considering that first lap incident and qualifying. Not too bad from Alex Albon. P9. Lance Stroll, another driver who struggled with tyres. Lucky, again, for his not to explode late on in the race. But I think I expected a little bit more. It was kind of unlucky that he didn't have the luxury of having a teammate to support him in that top 10 fight. Hülkenberg, of course, not starting the race. We mentioned that a little bit earlier on. Stroll got stuck behind a couple of the Mclarens really early on and the Renaults. But then you really do need a much quicker car to overtake in Formula 1 these days. DRS wasn't super powerful. It was powerful enough, but I think for Stroll, it was just managing those tyres, being able to overtake when he needed to, just wasn't quite gelling today. 2 points isn't ideal when you consider that Racing Point car, on average, is about the third best car in the field. 2 points for the team. They kind of do need Perez to come back as quickly as possible, which is nothing against Nico Hülkenberg. He did a fantastic job last minute jumping in, doing quali, but they really do need that consistent driver that they can rely on. And if Hülkenberg races next weekend, I hope he can do a brilliant job. And Stroll, to be fair to him, has done an awesome job so far this year, but just didn't quite come to plan today at Silverstone. Vettel rounded out the points. We spoke about him a little bit earlier on, but really struggled to make any kind of progress, any kind of momentum. And if it wasn't for Sainz and Bottas's late punches, wouldn't have finished anywhere near the points. We spoke about Bottas a little bit earlier on. The two Williams cars had a quiet day. We didn't really see a lot of them. We saw a Nicholas Latifi overtake on Kimi Raikkonen. Kimi, though, really struggled today. And George just missing out on those first F1 points once again, but a solid drive nonetheless. Williams, Alpha, the two Haas cars, we've said it all season long, it's so hard to judge their performances. Those cars really aren't great, so P12, not too bad. We spoke about Carlos Sainz earlier, was one of my picks for driver of the day, so unlucky with that puncher with a few laps to go. Giovinazzi, I kind of alluded to it earlier, was impressed with his drive today. Like K-Mag, made up so many positions on that opening lap, did fall backwards as the race went on. That Alpha is a terrible car. Raikkonen struggled so much today, was constantly way off the pace of Latifi, way off the pace of Russell and his teammate. So Giovinazzi, a strong weekend. I don't really think there's much more he could have done, to be honest with you. We mentioned Latifi a minute ago, a good drive. Constantly near to George Russell, not a lap down, not 20-25 seconds behind. The gap was on average about 5 seconds throughout the Grand Prix. Made that overtake on Kimi Raikkonen, which was great to see a Williams doing an overtake around the outside of Stowe. You don't see that very often in modern Formula 1, but he's slowly getting up to speed. I don't think anyone's expecting him to be on George Russell's level, but he's certainly being a nice backup to George Russell. And for Williams, he's been, for the most part, consistent. No spins in the race today either. Much better performance. Romain Grosjean. what a mixed bag of a day. The team went for a very bold strategy call. They didn't pit when everyone else did, and the team and their strategy was relying on there being another safety car late on. And they kind of were really unlucky, considering if a couple of those tyres for the other guys had exploded maybe 10 laps or so earlier. It could have worked. If there was another crash somewhere, it could have worked. But running in 5th place, and to be fair to Grosjean, his race pace was pretty awesome actually. And there was a time where I was thinking, if there is a safety car, if this strategy does work out, certainly got to throw him in there for driver of the day. And then things kind of flipped on their heads. After holding off Sainz for several laps and doing some solid defensive manoeuvres, things kind of boiled over a little bit. A very late move up towards Stowe, earned himself a black and white flag, and it was a little bit disappointing. It's not something we usually see from Grosjean. It's more of a incident we used to see Verstappen do. Doesn't do it so much now, but certainly young Verstappen used to do it a hell of a lot. Kevin Magnussen over the last few years, it's kind of become synonymous for making very late moves like that in the braking zone. And then Grosjean did it again later on with Daniel Ricciardo in the Grand Prix and got away with it. I've seen a lot of moaning about this. I've seen a lot of complaining about this. And I feel there is a bit of a double standard on this one, because the reason he's been able to get away with it is that policing these kind of incidents has been all over the place for the last few years. And even today, they've certainly set a precedent by giving a black and white flag for Grosjean and also Lance Stroll for doing it later on. But then that second incident for Grosjean with Ricciardo wasn't quite as bad as the first one and wasn't as bad as Stroll's first one. Got away with it. We saw it last year. Charles Leclerc did a very similar incident with Lewis Hamilton. Leclerc, of course, went on to win on that particular occasion. And yes, it was an awesome race and fantastic to see a Ferrari winning in Monza again. But you can't really pick and choose with these kind of incidents. Magnussen did it to Pierre Gasly in Baku, squeezed him very, very late into the pit wall during practice and got away with that only a couple of years ago. And it's those inconsistencies which is why I'm kind of perplexed why people are so angry this time, haven't been in previous occasions. But I do think these kind of incidents are so dangerous. All of them should be getting penalties. Black and white flag is a step in the right direction, but you can't just give a warning and then nothing. I want to explore this a little bit in further detail to see if we do have any late penalties over the remainder of the weekend, but it's something I think really does need to be set in stone. I know that's really hard to do in Formula 1 terms, but I think being blasé like they've been over the last 4 or 5 years for very dangerous incidents like this isn't on, and they really do need to brush it up on that. Grosjean, though, for the most part, a strong race, but those couple of incidents didn't do him any favours today. Kimi Raikkonen, the final finisher, I've mentioned it several times, bless him, just not quite on the pace today. His front wing failed as well, giving him a puncture late on. The only driver to be lapped, actually, which was quite interesting, but a day to forget for Kimi Raikkonen. Danny Kvyat retired very early on in the Grand Prix. Not quite sure on the reason to why. He was beating himself up quite a bit after the incident, blaming himself, but further analysis after the race from Formula 1 suggesting that something flew off his car just before the incident happened, flew back, hit the right rear tyre, gave him an instant puncture, and he flew off into the Beckett's grandstand. If it were a huge impact, hope he's okay, looks okay, but we'll have to see over the next couple of days how the impact really does affect him. But before that, he was having an okay race, but we'll never quite know what it would have turned into. It was such an early incident. Magnussen we spoke about, and Hülkenberg we spoke about. So overall, not a bad race here in Silverstone. Talking points and plenty of dramas up and down the field. And with those late tyre explosions, next weekend, hotter temperatures expected. We're going to softer compounds with F1 in terms of tyres, so duration and durability is going to be much less. Should be even better. But I did enjoy today's race. But before we get to driver of the day and my race rating, your Drivers' Championship looks like this. No surprise, Lewis Hamilton extends his lead after victory today. 88 points, 30 points now in front of teammate Valtteri Bottas, who was so unlucky to score 0 today. Bottas himself is only 6 points clear of Verstappen. Leclerc manages to move himself up to P5, but Lando Norris holds on in P4 for the time being. Albon drops down to 6, he's only 4 points in front of Sergio Perez. Stroll makes himself a little bit closer now to his teammates with 20 points, joint with Daniel Ricciardo, who jumps into the top 10, and Sainz, so unlucky with that puncher, just holds on 15 points. Ocon and Gasly, the two Frenchmen, on 12 points apiece in 11th and 12th. Sebastian Vettel drops to 13th place, 10 points for the German. 23 of teammate Max Verstappen, 8 points in front of Giovinazzi in the Alfa Romeo. Danny Kvyat and Magnussen, the final two drivers to score in 14th and 15th. Raikkonen, Latifi, Russell and Grosjean all yet to do so. And your constructors' standings is one of the most juicy constructors' fights we have ever seen in Formula 1. Mercedes, yes, they're running away with it. Red Bull probably nailed on for P2. But everyone else is in a monumental scrap. McLaren do hold on in P3, but Ferrari jump racing point by 1 point. Renault had a much better weekend. They're up to 6th with 32 points. AlphaTauri continued to score with Pierre Gasly now on 13. 2 for Alfa Romeo, 1 for Haas, and Williams the only team yet to do so. And before we go, it's time for Driver of the Day, race rating, and a little look at Formula 2. Yesterday, I went with Charles Leclerc for my qualifying Driver of the Day, but in the race, I'm giving it to Daniel Ricciardo. An awesome drive from the Aussie. I've put Leclerc as my runner-up for Race Driver of the Day, and as such, my F1E Driver of the Weekend is Charles Leclerc. 4th in quali, 3rd in the race, another surprise podium in 2020 for Ferrari, meaning in half of the races we've had this year, Leclerc's been on the podium, which is very, very strange considering their pace this year, but I think that's very much deserved. Shout out also to Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly, who also drove some fantastic Grand Prix. And race rating, I've gone with 7 out of 10. I know that middle stint wasn't the best, but those early dramas, those early safety cars, throw in what I am honestly going to remember as one of the most incredible final laps. Lewis Hamilton just clawing himself over the line, reminiscent of that piston cup in cars. Loved it, loved it, loved it. 7 out of 10 for me. Not quite the best of the season, but some of the most iconic moments of 2020 so far. And just before we go, your Formula 2 report for the weekend. In the feature race, Nikita Mazepin, what a drive from the young Russian, took his first ever feature race victory. It was Guan Yu Zhou and Yuki Tsunoda sharing the podium. Callum Ilott was my driver of the day, started second, stalled on the grid, started from pit lane, clawed his way back to 5th place, a brilliant drive from the British driver. And in the sprint race, Dan Ticktum from reverse grid pole took his maiden win in Formula 2. The controversial figure held on late over Christian Lundgaard, who went on the alternate strategy, threw on the medium tyres with a few laps to go. Delatraz on the podium. Daruvula, also like Lundgaard, went for that alternate strategy and did a great drive to his best result in 4th. Christian Lundgaard, my driver of the weekend, 4th in the feature race, 2nd in the sprint race. And your championship heading into the next round at Silverstone, Robert Schwartzman, despite not scoring a single point this weekend, still holding on to P1. Ilott closes the gap, now 73 compared to Schwartzman 81. Lundgaard continues to close both of them down as well on 69 for the Dane. Schwartzman and Lundgaard leading the rookie standings. And that is your lot from the 2020 British Grand Prix. Join us next weekend for the 70th anniversary Grand Prix. Formula E returns midweek as well. My goodness, is racing back, ladies and gentlemen. As always, if you are new around here, feel free to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed today's race review. And if you did, feel free to hit the like button, it really helps out the channel. But if you didn't, hit that dislike and leave some feedback in the comment section down below. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.